Hey guys, and welcome to the newest episode of Be Hero Presents the Bump Card Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Brian, and with me tonight is my tag partner, Psycho. How are you tonight, Psycho?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. I'm feeling good.
Me too. And I know I didn't mention this off the air, but I figure it's a good place to mention it now. I've got exciting news.
Ooh.
We are only a few episodes away from our 100th episode of Bump Card Wrestling Podcast.
Wow. That's seems like just yesterday.
Oh, well, that many chair shots I take on a regular basis, everything feels like it was yesterday. All right. With that being said, guys, we have a great episode getting ready for you. I'm sure, as you guys saw on the title, we are going to be talking about the the best of and the worst of WCW, kind of like we did with AEW of who helped and hurt. We're doing the same thing here with WCW of who helped WCW and who hurt WCW. But before we jump into that, as we do every week, we will talk about the wrestling news of the week. So, Psycho, as we always do, hit me up with that wrestling news.
So, kind of an interesting thing on a business side. So you know how maybe you may or may not be aware that with WWE they've got like their major shows like WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble. They usually like cities are like basically paying them rights fees to bring those events to their town. Well, and then a lot of the overseas stuff that like they've been doing have also been paying rights fees for those types of shows that are going overseas. Well, they're trying to get it where cities will pay to even just have like a Raw or a SmackDown come to their city, so that then they don't have to basically pay for the venue or anything. The city will pay for them to come to their city and promote it for them and everything. So it's all profit basically going in. I think that that's really, if they can do that, like that's going to help financially for the WWE so much.
Oh yeah, because they're totally hurting.
Right. Not that it's like, oh, that'll really turn them around. No, it's money on top of money, right? The rich get richer, basically. Right? That's exactly what that is.
The downside to that, though, is it becomes a bidding war, right? It's part of the reason why we don't have like pay-per-views here in Utah is because of the bidding war for that. You have places like Vegas or things like that that are going to be paying more money to promote or to have people come to there to try and get them to go. So it's a pretty big downside for everybody else.
I didn't think of that. That's from that standpoint, if like a Salt Lake City can't, compete with a Vegas or a Los Angeles or Miami, those types of things, I could see where you'd see a lot of the same types of arenas hosting the events, or you'd have a lot of them being out of the country, and that sort of thing. So I could see that from a business standpoint, probably makes a lot of business sense for WWE to go that route.
It's because it's like the Olympics in a sense, right? Like you're doing a thing, you're bidding on a thing to make it so that though we're going to be holding it here, you're getting all the benefits because you get all the tourism and the hotel sales and everything like that, which is what you would want to do. And what you see with pay-per-views all the time, or PLEs all the time. But for doing it for your weekly shows and doing, who says they want to do it for their now limiting house shows, right? It makes it harder to get the more rural fan to be able to go, right? Because if they're starting to like make it so that whoever has the higher bidder, Salt Lake's probably not going to get a Raw or a SmackDown. We might be lucky to get a house show, which means we'd have to go to somewhere like Vegas or Denver, who probably be able to pay for it, having the bid out to be able to get that show to go for us to go there, right? I had we were out flyering for the Raw that came this here, or SmackDown, sorry, the SmackDown that came here a couple months ago. And I was talking to some of the fans who were in line and stuff as we were handing out flyers. And there were so many fans from Montana that came down. And the reason being is they don't get Raw in Montana, right? Or SmackDown in Montana. And same for Idaho or Wyoming. You just don't get them there. And that's how it is now. Salt Lake was the biggest area for them to come down to be able to see a SmackDown ad. And if we aren't able to bid on that, we'll lose out. And they'll lose out. They'll have to go to Denver, or they'll have to go to Seattle or something like
that. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out and see if they'd still get it to, some of those cities that don't normally get them and that sort of thing, or if it would just be the big markets. Yeah. I don't know.
They go back to Staples Center 3 times on 2 months.
Right. It's like where it's like, all right, these 4 cities are bidding the most. We're just going to cycle through that. I mean, honestly, that's not much different than, AEW's like in the lead up to their All In. They're basically having a residency in one of their cities where they're going to be there like for like a month straight, all their shows. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, but they didn't do much different when they were at the Daly's place, right?
Right. So, but that was like their home arena, right? It's a little bit different when they're paying them to come in and basically hold fort there for a month.
But for something like that also makes sense because that does help them. Like, it's that level of doing something for the fan or doing something for the money, right? AEW kind of needs it for the money because you can do a thing like that where you're doing a residency so that they can kind of stay there. It helps on travel and stuff like that, but it also helps on making sure that you can get the fan to come in there regularly. But something like WWE, you don't have as much of that problem. Plus, the WWE bought and paid for all of their stuff for their trailers and stuff decades ago. So it's not like they need to be worrying about that as much as AEW does.
Right. And for AEW, with their attendance not being, as strong as it once was, it probably makes a lot more sense if somebody's willing to pay them, to do shows there, because then the attendance isn't hurting their bottom line as much.
Exactly.
And they probably can get the same 500 fans, or 1,000, to show up each week, for all, because those are the diehards.
It is crazy to me to think that there were times when AEW's shows that they ran where they had as many people at a show that as many as I've worked at in shows. Like AEW is such a high end product because they're the number 2 company, right? That you expect to see like tens of thousands of people at every show. But then to see that like they might have like 500-600 people at the show, it's like I've worked in front of shows with 500 or 600 people.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Yeah, me too.
A 300-person show outside of our rec center that we were at because they decided to do the floors last month.
Right. Yeah, crazy times. I also see a news story here that WWE is also, or I guess Saudi Arabia is putting their hat into looking to host a Royal Rumble or a WrestleMania in 2026 or 2027, which would be interesting. Huh?
A big 4, huh?
Yeah, one of those. It'd be interesting a WrestleMania in Saudi Arabia. I don't know how many fans from outside the country would travel to that one. I don't know. You probably wouldn't get a lot of the ones from the States going to Saudi Arabia.
I would guess it would probably be one of the lowest attended ones.
I mean, well, Saudi Arabia can probably pack, they do pack a lot of them, but I think a lot of that is they're almost like forcing them to go type deal, their country. And uh so they'll get attendance, but not all of them are wrestling fans. Right?
Yeah.
So it'd be a very different feel.
I guess it's like I'm not terribly upset with the one coming this weekend for the King of the Ring. But honestly, the reason I'm not upset with it is because it's the return of the King of the Ring, and that's what I care about more than where it's at.
Yeah, I'm excited for King of the Ring and Queen of the Ring. I've always liked that. I just, as long as it's done properly and well. They've done some King of the Rings where it's just like, okay, this is not as prestigious as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they'll get back to that and make this an important thing.
I had to laugh, side tangent, but my youngest, she asked me the other day when we were watching Raw. She's like, "Dad, is the King of the Ring meant to be every 4 years?" And I'm like, "No, it just happened to have been that way this last time. They just do it whenever they feel like it."
Yeah, well, hopefully, I would love for it to be an annual thing again.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Why don't you cover the Eddie Kingston injury news?
Yep. So last week we didn't cover this, but Eddie Kingston was injured working a show in Japan, defending his strong style title that he has. And it turns out that the injury that he has is a torn ACL and meniscus injury, which I know all too well, by the way. And he is actually going to require surgery and will not be able to work again until next year. So we will not be seeing an Eddie Kingston in AEW or anywhere for about a year.
Ugh.
I'm not terribly heartbroken because, my feelings on Eddie Kingston. But I am heartbroken to an aspect because you don't want to see any worker of any variety to have to go out in an injury, especially for a long period of time like that. So I do feel bad, especially with that injury, because I've had that injury. I know exactly how it feels. And it sucks.
Yeah, and then I also in other injury news, I see that Athena suffered an injury during the latest Ring of Honor taping.
That's correct.
So yeah, so she's I don't know the severity of it. I'm just but she did get injured in a match. I guess by spilling out to the outside over the top rope.
Yeah.
I didn't watch it. I didn't see it, but and then let's see if I have anything else here. Yeah, I think that's really all I've got for this week for the news.
Okay. Well, with all that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and get right into the meat and potatoes of our episode here. We are going to now be talking about the people who helped and hurt WCW, and not just towards the end, but through the whole of WCW. I don't know if we want to start from the origin of WCW, from like the time that Ted Turner bought it and forward, or if we want to start from the beginning of the Monday Night Wars, or where we want to start from with
that. We can start it from when Ted Turner bought it.
I guess that's the question. Is we might as well put him out there. Ted Turner.
Yeah.
Did he hurt?
I actually think he tremendously helped WCW because he was always a strong component for it. He put a lot of money behind it. And he was the one that greenlit the Monday Night Wars. So, to have Nitro, to get that. I think a lot of the only thing I'd say as far as hurting it for Ted Turner would be that him basically merging with Time Warner and everything, and where he lost control of the company, where he no longer had as much pull as he once had. Because I fully believe that if Ted Turner was still, the owner of WCW, that he wouldn't have pulled the plug, because he was a huge fan of WCW. So I don't. But at the time that it went out of business and everything, it was out of his hands, and there were people that did not like wrestling that suddenly had control over whether or not they wanted it on their programming. So what are your thoughts on Ted Turner there?
I agree wholeheartedly. Actually, I think Ted was not just a great component for WCW, but in wrestling in general, right? Because he's a huge fan of the NWA and everything else. And of course, without Ted Turner and the push for WCW, there wouldn't have been really the attitude area for WWE. So all in all, I think he's tremendously helped. And I agree with you. Like, I think if he was sole owner, like, we might still see WCW as a thing. Would it be in the same level? Probably not, as it was, but we would still see WCW in some fashion. So yeah, definitely helped with that. So moving on from there, I guess we talk about the man who ostensibly created the Monday Night Wars, Mr.
Eric
Bischoff.
Bischoff. So this one's an interesting one. I feel like obviously he helped, because without Bischoff, there is no Nitro. And he brought Hulk Hogan to the to WCW, and that tremendously changed like the whole image of WCW, having Hulk Hogan show up and that sort of thing. He was tremendously innovative. And he had that chip on his shoulder of, hey, we're gonna compete, and so I feel like he helped it a lot. Because he's the only guy to beat the WWE for 83 straight weeks, and that's just the weeks consecutively, right? Because they were winning, other weeks, that they had higher ratings than Raw. And he basically forced the WWE to change their whole business model. He forced, Raw to go to 2 hours. He forced Raw to stop having squash matches and to, have more stars competing against each other. He forced it to go live instead of being a taped show. And he basically forced them to think outside the box and, do the Attitude Era. So, he's the only one that really gave Vince McMahon a run for their money as far as competing. Now, with that being said, I feel like he does shoulder some of the blame, though, for the demise as well, because I feel like he let it go to his head a little bit, I think, and he got cocky and he relaxed a little bit, thinking that that they would beat WWE forever.
Yeah.
And so I think he made a lot of mistakes as well, like spending too much money on talent that shouldn't have been paid that much, especially talent that was paid to sit at home and they weren't being used. So there was a lot of money spent that way. And honestly, I see Tony Khan kind of doing the same mistakes, a lot of that. But
also not building new stars.
Right, not building new stars, keeping basically a lot of the mid-card roster that could have been major stars, down, holding them back, like a Chris Jericho, a Rey Mysterio,
Rascals in general. So you had
Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and all those guys. And so that was one. Letting certain talent go like a Steve Austin or a Mick Foley or those types, where they would go on to be big stars wrestling for Vince McMahon in the WWE. So those types of things, and being drunk with power, basically, and his whole dispute with Ric Flair, all of those things. I mean, all those things were mistakes. So he's probably the one guy where, and there might be another one now they think about it, but he had just as much to do with the success as he did the downfall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he definitely was in the middle group of many things for helping and many things for hurting, for the WCW. Bischoff is such an interesting dude too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've done shows with Bischoff.
Yeah, we've met, done shows, met and talked with him and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's such a chill dude now. I think we talked about this after we first met him, and after talking with him for a while, that I'm like, he seems like a chill dude now, but he seems like he was a my way or the highway guy kind of guy who's just reformed himself.
Yeah, when you get older, you get more mellow, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're not having a multi-million-dollar company, where you've got to make all the decisions. When you're no longer the boss, you don't have that stress level. And so,
Well,
I never ran a multi-million-dollar company, but even just running a wrestling promotion, I get the stress level, and sometimes it does make you have to be a dick, and it just kind of comes with the territory.
and even that, like, comparison to what you were doing, or even like when I've read the books and stuff like that for shows, that's only one aspect, right?
Right.
Like, he was doing everything. He wasn't really delegating stuff out like somebody else I know. He was always being the guy, and not only did he have to be the boss for everything that was going on, but he also had to answer to the board, right, for everybody at Time Warner, and everybody at Turner. What was the name of the Turner's company?
Turner Broadcasting, or the
yeah. Before Time Warner and them did their merge, he had to answer to the board and explain why they were spending so much money, where it was all going, and how to do that. So he was ostensibly a middle management at the highest level. And yeah, that stress would be just insane. So trying to think out of the box or trying to do things differently, I can see why, like, some of the quote unquote mistakes he made, he kind of had to make.
Yeah, and he definitely did some things outside of the box, like giving away finishes, to Monday Night Raw's cheap shows, that had never been done before. Or challenging Vince McMahon to a fight on national TV, at basically saying it for a pay-per-view. It's like, I challenge you to a fight at this next pay-per-view. Those types of things have never been done, so he was exactly what WCW needed, as somebody as a boss, somebody that actually took the fight to Vince. But again, I feel like it would have been different had it been his own money that he was spending too. I don't know. He could probably say it actually made it harder because he had to get things approved or different things like that, whereas if it was his own money, he could use it how he wanted. However, I don't think he would have spent it the same way if it was his money. So I think in that regard, it's a little bit different than Tony Khan with AEW, in the fact that Tony Khan's using his own money, or his family's own money, right? He's not having somebody else that's writing the paychecks, so to speak. But yeah, Bischoff, I think WCW doesn't have the success without Eric Bischoff running things. I I just think maybe he needed people around him that could steer him in the right direction or bring him back down, to earth when like he was doing things like trying to sue Ric Flair for not making a house, not making a Thunder when he had the day off or something, and those types of things. I think that if he had people around him that were able to say, hey, I don't think this is a good idea, rather than him just kind of going off of his emotions and trying to make examples out of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I got my own opinions on Eric Bischoff after having met him and had conversations with him. Like, I feel, and this happens to everybody, but I feel like a lot of what he feels would be successful with a wrestling promotion, I think no longer apply now. Like, he kind of was still kind of stuck in the past as far as now, as far as like feeling like wrestling needs television now and that sort of thing, where like WWE is kind of proving that wrong with taking Raw to Netflix and things like that. And so, but he's not the first, to kind of have ideas that are no longer relevant in today's world. Jim Cornette's another one, that kind of is that way.
What's interesting
about so many mm-hmm.
is I was listening to a Twitter, what do they call them? Portal, I think it is, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically an online stream, audio stream through Twitter, with Gabe Sapolsky. He's the talent agent for the WWE. And he had mentioned something very similar in this case about the way of thinking about doing shows. For those who don't know, Gabe Sapolsky had started ROH. He started Evolution. He had started
Dragon Gate
at USA. So like he's a man in the know when it comes to
he was Paul Heyman's right hand man at ECW for a while.
Exactly, yeah. So he understands exactly about how to book shows, how they get crowds, and stuff like that. And he had an interesting take on it because he had been talking about this specific thing about how are we just stuck in our old ways about needing TV or needing streaming or needing stuff like that. And he brought up things like the WWE or ROH, who has AXS and stuff like that as like their own channel, essentially. And even talking about, or sorry, not ROH, Impact, or talking about like ROH, who went from doing like tapes and TV stuff to trying to go online with streaming, and it just didn't really seem to click as well as it did back in the day. And his take was quite interesting on it because he suggested that we don't per se do as much on focusing on streaming and stuff like that, but kind of focus more like the territory days back in the day and trying to focus more on the house show. So you do things on social media that like take clips and stuff from your show, but you promote to try and get people to come to the shows because they have a billion things to watch on TV, but you focus on the entertainment of it. You focus on the live spectacle of the event instead of the production value of TV instead. And use that as a way to bring in new fans because it then becomes, once again, like the territory days with the Carney stuff, but it's something for somebody to go out and do. They have so many options to do for home. You're never going to get into that piece of pie. But for something to do outside of the home, there's not as much stuff as there once was.
Yeah.
So,
and that's pretty much how ECW ran in the early days too, because if you like watch their ECW, the main show that ECW had on weekly syndicated television, it was basically just a promo for their shows, because they very rarely, they didn't give away, you know, the major things. They would run basically you know, highlights of their show and say, hey, you know, buy this show. They were in the tape business, you know. It's like, buy our videotape of this show, you know, to find out, you know, what, you know, to see the footage of Kimona Wanalea dancing atop the ECW arena or something like that we can't show you on television. And they would promote it that way, and they made most of their money on attendance and tapes, you know, being sold. They were actually paying to have their television show aired. So they weren't making money off of their TV. It was all using that as almost an infomercial to get people to the shows or to buy their videotapes, because they didn't have pay-per-view at the time. So that was really what they were making their money on, or their merchandise. You know, it was basically a commercial. It was a 30-minute wrestling show, you know, or I don't remember if it was 30 minutes or an hour, but they'd show like one match, you know, or clips of a couple of matches. And then everything else, they just plugged the heck out of it. And Paul Heyman was very good at getting people, you know, he was very good on the promotion aspect. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, side tangent we got off on there. We're not talking about ECW, we're talking about WCW.
Do ECW in the future.
Yes, exactly. Coming soon to a podcast near you.
But yeah, so Bischoff did have that middle ground. But let's go ahead and talk about his counterpart, as it were, when it comes to booking, excuse me. Kind of the man that most people claim killed WCW, and that is Vince Russo. Another man
we've worked extensively with.
Yes.
So Vince Russo, he's an interesting guy. I have very mixed feelings on Vince Russo. I feel like super nice guy. You know, like meeting him and stuff, it's very easy to have a conversation with Vince. And I think as a person, he's a very nice guy. I feel he has his strengths, right? He's great at producing segments or promos, that sort of thing. He's really good at that and giving you the direction, you know. I don't think from a wrestling standpoint, and he'll be the first to tell you, that's not his forte. He won't tell you what to do in a wrestling match as far as the moves go, right? He doesn't. That's not what he does. He handles the stories, and then you're the wrestler. You're supposed to come up with the match, because he knows nothing about wrestling. He knows about the story, yes, right? So, and that's kind of, I can see where a lot of hardcore wrestling, fans or wrestling, people that are old school in the wrestling business have against him as well, though, is that he doesn't, he came in and basically flipped everything on its head, and didn't do it the wrestling way. Right. And that's both good and bad. I don't think, and I'll say this right here, I do not think he killed WCW. Did he speed up the process? That's debatable. But the reason that WCW brought Vince Russo in was because they were already in trouble. I remember being like, before Vince Russo took over, like the shows had gotten stale. Bischoff was sent home and everything. And I had just started hearing about this Vince Russo guy that was basically writing, the main writer for WWF programs.
Him and Ed.
Yeah, him and Ed Ferrara. And so when I heard, and I had like been reading interviews from him and stuff leading up to it, getting to know him a little bit. When WCW had signed him, I thought, I was excited for it at first. I was like, okay, this is going to be different. I mean, nothing else was working, so it's like, why not give it a shot? But it was already like a, hey, here comes somebody that might be able to save it. So it was already heading in that direction, because like the finger poke of doom, those types of things, and we'll touch on those types of things. Those had happened long before Vince Russo got there. So when
Yeah, but that was booking by wrestlers. Like that was
right, or the them saying, that'll put butts in seats, when Mick Foley won the WWF championship on Monday Night Raw, and like, like 100 or 200,000 people simultaneously change the channel to go see Mick Foley, be crowned champion. Those types of things that happened before Vince Russo got there. So they had already lost their momentum, right? So now, on the flip side, I mean, on the positive side for Vince, is that there were people getting a shot or getting airtime that were not getting it prior. Because one positive about Vince Russo is that he makes sure everybody on the roster has a story, right? So nobody's going out there in a meaningless match. Everybody has a story and so you get guys that, the younger guys that would get more TV time, like he was behind the Radicals, or
the Radicals, Buff Bagwell,
yeah,
Alex Knight, Disco Inferno.
yeah,
Like
all of those young guys, he was, again, for the older wrestlers, not so much, like the Ric Flairs or the Hulk Hogan's and those types, right? Roddy Piper. So he was phasing them out in favor of the new stars. I think it could have been done in a better way, but I think there were some moments that were huge mistakes. Like, everybody will point to David Arquette being crowned WCW heavyweight champion.
Judy Bagwell on a pole.
Yeah, which actually wasn't on a pole. Everybody says Judy Bagwell on a pole, but he was actually on a forklift if you go back and watch. But that's beside the point. But those types of things, he gets, rightfully so, he gets a lot of flack for those things. However, he is not the first person in WCW to write bad stuff, right? Bad skits,
Yeah.
or
I mean, you hear bookers all the time coming up with these crazy ideas, like a pterodactyl on a pole match.
Hey, that was a joke. That was not an actual serious idea. Regardless, I just like to throw that out there. Or ACW the musical.
Yeah, exactly.
Or reverse blindfold match. These things. But David Arquette winning the championship, that was a tough one. And then Vince Russo winning the championship himself. Like, in theory, I get why he did those things. It's like, okay, well, it'll get people talking if David Arquette wins it. My thing with it is, I don't think people would have had as much of an issue with it if it was an Arnold Schwarzenegger or a Bruce Willis, even, or somebody that could be believable winning that. David Arquette, Dewey, Deputy Dewey from Scream movies, that was not the guy to do that.
And they were trying to tie it in with Ready to Rumble, which bombed.
Right.
I love that movie. Don't get me wrong. I love that movie, but it bombed. And then with Russo winning it himself, like, it was designed exactly to do what it did, and that was to make a moment for people to talk about. And it did. But it's a similar thing that we just saw recently with AEW, like doing the Punk footage, right? Where it's doing a moment. Yes, everyone talked about it. Yes. Did it help in any way outside of a short-term gain to do anything? No, it didn't. If anything, it hurt things. AEW's kind of gracefully been able to handle it better than WCW has done with those others we mentioned in the past. But it's the same vein. Like, it's something that was a short-term gain to try and get the name of WCW on people's lips, and it did exactly that. And then as soon as it left those lips, it was not back. Like, as soon as it left their lips, they didn't continue talking about it. because it was not something that grabbed them. Watching Raw, right? You watch Raw, or watching WWE in general, and you watch Stone Cold Steve Austin roll up in a big uh, Budweiser truck and hose down McMahon and his posse, right? Same concept. It's a moment. It was huge. It made people talk. But because they continued to go down that path, it was something that was for McMahon, or sorry, it was something that tied into the McMahon Austin story that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
It kept people coming back. You wanted to see more. And then when you do a callback later with Kurt and the milk truck tying in against Austin and McMahon, who are working together now, it makes sense. Dewey winning it to try and build off of the success, quote unquote, of Ready to Rumble, which didn't happen, or Russo doing it just to have that moment to try and get people to talk about WCW, it didn't help.
Right. I mean, David Arquette winning it, they might as well have had Steve Urkel come in. That probably would have been more believable because the Jaleel White that plays Steve Urkel is actually pretty built, you know. But
yeah, the black belt in BJJ now. So
there you go. So yeah, that didn't work. You know, some of the other things he did, like having Ed Ferrara go out there as Oklahoma, you know, imitating Jim Ross, and imitating his Bell's palsy and stuff. That was just in bad taste.
yeah.
It helped nobody. Like, who was that supposed to get heat for? Ed Ferrara, who was not a wrestler. You know, it's like, what in the world? Like, it was just in bad taste. Yeah, it got people talking, but it's like you're making fun of somebody's ailment on the other show. Like, that's not the kind of publicity or people, you know, the buzz that you want to create.
Well, and that was kind of what you would like see on Russo's version of WCW, right? And this is why I think he did harm more than he really helped. He created moments that were short-lived moments, but he did it for the attention without any purpose, right? It's almost like somebody claiming that they're pregnant just to keep a man around, right? Not saying that anyone does that. I'm not trying to throw shade. I'm just saying it's that same kind of thing. You're trying to get the attention that's a short-lived game. Like, where do you go from there, right?
That's one of the things that Bischoff has said about Vince Russo, is that he's a great idea guy. Vince Russo comes up with these very, you know, creative ideas, but when Bischoff would ask Russo, all right, then what? Where's it going? Vince Russo would look at Bischoff with a blank, you know, deer in the headlights look, like, what do you mean? You know, and Bischoff is like, where's it heading? Where's this? What is this leading up to? Why is this, you know, what's next? What's the, you know, next chapter of this story? And there wasn't one. It was just basically, all right, let's throw this at the wall and see what sticks, sort of thing.
It's in storytelling. You have two rules of thought, right? In improv, the improv version of storytelling, you have what's called "and then." So something happens, and then something else happens, and then something else happens, and then something else happens. In traditional storytelling in movies and books and stuff, you have "but then." So something happens, but then this other thing happens to cause more conflict, to cause more drama, and then adds on to something as a shock value, but then adds drama onto something to continue the story. And a but then can have a conclusion, and then really is an everlasting thing because there's no real conflict to resolve with an and then. And Russo's an and then.
Yeah, side little note on Vince Russo is that I will say, though, that out of all the people that I've worked with in the wrestling business and whatnot, Vince Russo's probably the one when I first met him that I felt like was the most surreal for me, that I was working on a show with Vince Russo, and like just seeing him, I was like, it was just the most surreal moment. Like Bischoff was like, it was, I couldn't believe it, but at the same time, I didn't get that. I didn't get that star power from Bischoff that I did from Vince Russo. Like I was like, and part of that's because he's so talked about, right? Like Eric, or I mean Vince Russo, that
He's very
for better or
controversial.
worse, huh?
Very controversial.
Yeah, very controversial, very polarizing figure.
Yeah.
You either, most people, they either, are very big on Russo, a Russo supporter, or they hate Vince Russo. It's usually one or the other, or it's usually very few that are like, in the middle. I feel like I'm a little bit on the in the middle, but I think with a filter, I think Vince Russo's a good guy. I think he did. I actually would have liked to have seen Vince Russo book longer for DCW, because I feel like the stuff he was writing was actually really interesting stories. And that's one thing that, like, in my opinion, I've been out of DCW for a little bit, but I feel like it doesn't have the stories that there were when Vince Russo was there, and I feel like that's one thing that could help. But so yeah, Vince Russo, did he? I don't think he was given a chance in the beginning long enough to make a difference, because there were some things he did that were interesting stories, but then he, for every great ideas, he'd have a monumental, like, what are you smoking, like, what are you doing idea, like, are you trying to kill the business, and so, like, are you really doing that? Is that really the plan? So it's a very hard egg to crack, so to speak.
Yeah. After I had a similar effect with Russo. I was in more of awe with Bischoff than I was Russo
Mhm.
when we met him. But I've never really been that way with anybody per se we've had that brought in. Like, I've never had a real, like, oh my goodness kind of scenario for anyone we've ever brought in, or I've ever worked with. But having the opportunity of working a lot more hand in hand with Russo, especially in comparison to Bischoff, it was quite interesting to work with him, and also to see how aligned a lot of our creative thoughts were when it came to the business. I was very surprised with that. But with Russo, I would have liked to see him longer with TCW as well, largely because, I had a good story going and that didn't get the finish. But he was, I think we've talked about this before. Russo in WCW, or excuse me, WWE, and along with FRR, they had such great ideas and they kind of threw everything against the wall, but they always had somebody to be like, no, that's stupid. Let's not do that with McMahon, right? Where in WCW, I don't think they ever really had that. And he kind of had the reins to do whatever he wanted. And sometimes for a creative person, that's just a bad idea,
Mm-hmm.
to giving them full power. Because then every idea is a good idea.
I can relate a little bit too, because I wish somebody would have said the invisible match, the invisible man match would have been, would have been a bad idea. I can't believe we actually put that on a show. But, yeah, I totally get the reference. I totally get the analogy there. So yeah, Vince Russo did do harm to WCW.
Very much so. I would put him very much more in the camp of harm than in the middle, like we did with Bischoff. Not saying he didn't have good stuff to him, but I think there was a lot more harm to it. And it also turned a lot of people off from watching WCW.
Yeah,
Not because of him, but because of the stuff he was doing.
I don't think he killed WCW. I just think he might have sped up the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's my take on that. Here's another one for you. Hulk Hogan.
Okay.
This is somebody I think this one is kind of like Bischoff of helped and hurt. I think with Hogan, obviously they do not reach the height that they did without Hogan. Some of the, Hogan coming in, I remember like at my local video store where before Hogan came to WCW, like it was so hard to like find a WCW wrestling videos. It was so hard to find. As soon as Hogan come in, the local video store down the street from me, like they started carrying every pay-per-view it would come in, a new release, and so he had that kind of an effect that people wanted to watch because Hogan's there. Oh, what is this WCW or WCW is cool now or whatever the case may be. So it got a buzz going for WCW, and then when when the Monday Night Wars happened and Hogan was at the forefront there, right? And then when the NWO was formed, Hogan turning heel, one of the biggest moments in wrestling history.
Yep.
It changed everything. Like really, like that was the thing that WWF could not compete with at the time. They were not ready for that type of a story. And so there was a lot of good from Hogan. Ratings went up, buy rates went up. They started making more money with Hogan. But like Bischoff, when you eventually you have to make a change, right? You can't ride the wave forever without pivoting. And I think with Hogan, because he had so much creative control, he held down a lot of, people or wrestlers or, shot down a lot of ideas that could have helped the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he heard it in a lot of ways too, because he was not letting the young stars, get elevated.
Okay. I agree with that. You hear stories from WCW days from a lot of the younger guys, like Jericho and others,
Mm-hmm.
who talk about Hogan in that vein. If you weren't part of his clique, you weren't making it on the show. If you were on the show, you made it on, or if you were lucky, you made it on the show. If you weren't, then you didn't. And even if you made it on the show, odds are you're going to get squashed by somebody in some variant of the NWO because of how much control the Hogan had. And not just Hogan. Like I would also at the same time, we can also put down Hall and Nash in the same vein
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's the same concept. I think the three together made WCW what it was. Hogan was the star of it. Hogan at the time was like The Rock is now. You have so much name value in Hogan that the casual fans and even the non-wrestling fans knew who Hogan was. And this is what they do with The Rock. So you have something like, oh my gosh, Hogan just went to WCW. He's never been there. He's always been a WWE guy. It was a huge thing. And then having it where he turns heel, that's another huge thing. So you're going to have these non-wrestling fans or the casual fans going to go see what's happening new. But then you keep him in the same vein and not change him and not use the equity you built up with him to make new stars. Then you're losing out. You're wasting everybody's time because as cool as Hogan was, as popular as he was, you're not going to have somebody go to watch him forever.
The like the only star that Hogan made, in my opinion, while he was in WCW was Goldberg. That's the only one he put over that he didn't get a quick win back or screw in some way. Because like jobbing to Lex Luger, he won the title back and everybody forgot it a week later. Sting, which should have been massively passing of the torch. It's like Sting now, much like Cody Rhodes with Roman Reigns type thing, right? It should have been that type of a moment. And they changed the finish at Starrcade to where there's a fast count, but it's not a fast count. It's a regular count, when Hogan pins Sting and then they restart the match for no reason, right? Those types of things because, Sting didn't look the part or he didn't show up tan and in shape, all those things. It's like, oh, this don't work for me, uh, like Goldberg's really the only one that he put over. And I feel like the only reason he didn't get that win back and squash him or whatever is because it didn't happen that way. It's just, it didn't, time ran out or they didn't book that. But, yeah, Hogan, I think he just had too much power,
which I'm starting to realize is a big problem with WCW is too many singular people had too much power and not enough monitoring of that power. Because you want creative control of who you are and your gimmick. Like Roman Reigns has had that for the last 4 years, and look what we've had. He still has that with the Bloodline now. But you have somebody there to be able to tamper down that power, whether it's be Triple H or McMahon before that, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned him. We might as well talk about Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash is somebody that, again, tremendously helped WCW with the whole, coming in with the Outsiders with Scott Hall, and the NWO. I think, there was a lot of good there. It created that buzz. The problem I feel like with Kevin Nash is when they made him head booker for WCW, because you should never, very rarely does it ever work where you've got an active wrestler on your roster as the booker and it leads to something positive, right? It's almost every time they're going to put themselves over. Very rarely does that happen.
Well, a lot of times you'll see guys who will see themselves as a higher level worker than they are. And as such, they're like, oh, I can't put so-and-so there because they're not to the quality I want. Right. I can do that. I'll take that bullet kind of thing. Which is something I enjoy from DCW. Our booker doesn't do that per se. He actually has to be told that he needs to take that spot.
Yeah. Kevin Nash had a couple of big things though that really hurt WCW. Obviously, he's involved in the finger poke of doom, right? Which everyone points at is one of the worst decisions ever, right? But I don't even say, because here's the thing: WWF had done something like that before that, when they had Triple H and Shawn Michaels wrestle for the European Championship, and Shawn laid down for Triple H to pin him and become the European champion. So that had been done before. I mean, look, it's a lot of the same guys, right? The Clique, right? But so even though that was a bad decision by itself, I don't think that was that devastating. It was that on the same night, that was when, Mick Foley was winning the title on the other channel, and they, announced that it was going to happen. Like, people wouldn't want to go see Mick Foley beat The Rock, and instead, and the ones that stayed, they got treated to a non-wrestling match, a bait and switch type thing where there wasn't a match. And so I feel like they lost those fans too, because they're like, we stayed and we missed Mick Foley winning the title for this, so there was that. I think both of those two things really hurt WCW. And Kevin Nash ending the streak of Goldberg was one of the worst decisions they ever made, because they were still competitive when Goldberg was champion. They were still winning a night here or a night there. It was back and forth, kind of. When Goldberg lost the title, it killed his drawing ability, and they had nothing else left to hook the viewer. There was nothing else. And that was their one last chance. Goldberg was the last chance they had to try to stay competitive. That was the star. And then as soon as they shot themselves in the foot and, ended the streak. And I get the rationale. It's like, well, Goldberg couldn't win forever, so we needed to get the belt off of him so we could tell better stories with him.
Use him to make us.
Yeah, use him to make somebody else, right? Which Kevin Nash isn't the guy to do that with.
No.
But I think they ended it too soon. He has to lose eventually, but I would have kept him winning for maybe another year, maybe another 6 months at least. He had just won it. Like, he won it in July. Like, that type of an undefeated streak should not have just lasted 6 months or 5 months. He lost it in December. It should have lasted a year at least. And then when somebody beats him, it's a much bigger deal. They pulled the trigger too soon. Imagine if the Undertaker at WrestleMania lost his streak, at WrestleMania, 11 instead of going on. It wouldn't have meant the same.
Yeah. Well, WrestleMania 11, we didn't even recognize the streak as what it was.
Right.
But if you look at it this way, right, we just had a year or 3.5 years of Roman Reigns as champion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And mind you, it's face versus heel, but the concept is similar. Mm-hmm. We allowed the streak to go on that long, which I mentioned many times on this podcast. I didn't think it did, or it was going to, and I was wrong. But they did it in a way where it kept the story going, and then when it finally made a person with Cody, it made not just him, honestly, because we've talked about this before, how many stars were made off this, but it made Cody a superstar. He is a face of a generation at this point, right? People always talk about like John Cena getting boos and yays and stuff like that. And even Cody in AEW was in the same treatment. But I don't see Cody getting booed like that again. I see Cody for at least another couple of years being the face of the company. And I mean the face of the company. Mm-hmm. And a large to do with that is the equity that was earned from keeping the streak going and having him be the guy to finally beat Roman Reigns. If you would have had something like that, let's say that, he held it for another 6 months, right? And he loses it to all people like Alex Wright, excuse me, out of the blue, right? Who Alex Wright, in his own right, was getting over with the crowd, but he would have blown up. He would have been huge as a worker. But Kevin Nash was already Kevin Nash at that point.
Yeah, and it was the wrong guy, wrong time. Because if they were going to just have him lose it, I would have had him lose it to Diamond Dallas Page at Halloween Havoc just a couple of months prior, because that would have made DDP as the guy. You know what I mean? Like, he was already majorly over, and he was a major threat to Goldberg, and it was Goldberg's best match to date. If DDP had won with the Diamond Cutter, DDP could have went on to have a great reign, and the momentum would have been just as good. Mm-hmm. But when Nash won it, especially with the whole cattle prod thing, the stun gun, that in losing in that way, and then it just gets passed to Hogan in the finger poke of doom the next week, it just made it not mean as much. Yeah. So yeah, Kevin Nash, he helped WCW, but he also hurt WCW.
I agree. I very much agree. And more in the latter of hurt, honestly. Like there were some things he did fine, but I think he definitely hurt more. All right. Let's see. There are two more names I can think of that I'd want to talk about on this, and I think we'll be wrapping it up after that. So let's go ahead and just talk about DDP.
I'm going to say 100% helped. Like, honestly, like, I mean, we just watched Spring Stampede 94 last week, and I mean, that's not the same DDP, right? That was somebody that was so green, and he didn't, like, if you would have told me that guy was going to be like a world champion, you know, and a star of the company, I would be like, yeah, right. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't looking like it, but DDP worked his butt off, you know, uh, to get into shape, to learn the business, and at such a late age too. He didn't get in the business until he was in his 30s, you
Yep.
know, and then it took him another, you know, what, 5 6 like another 2 or 3 years, you know, before he got any good. And then, but once he did, like, he was such a major part of the WCW versus NWO storyline, like, because he was the first one to turn down the NWO asking him to be part of it. And
Yeah.
you know, when he hit Scott Hall with the diamond cutter and everything, it was a big moment. And then his feud with Randy Savage and stuff, all of that was big. And he could have been, like, he was more, like, honestly, if I had to do it all over again, he was more over than Sting at times. Like, if he would have won the title there, he could have went on and you know, been the Cody Rhodes of the promotion or whatever, and people would have bought into that. So I honestly, I don't see how he hurt it. He didn't do anything damaging. The only thing is that he was part of the match where David Arquette won the championship, but he had nothing to do with that. He was just in the match.
But and that also ties into like the movie because he was in the movie. He was the main villain of the
Right.
movie. So like it makes sense to have him there. And I agree. I think DDP was a tremendous help outside of becoming a homemade star, which is who he
Mhm.
was.
Yeah.
For there, it gave fans somebody to root for as the ultimate face, right? That you can totally root behind, and as a casual fan, also root behind him. Where you had others like Sting, we've talked about, or Steamboat at the beginnings, things like that. You had people like those who like you wanted to root for, but you kind of already knew who they were, right? So you're rooting for them because of nostalgia to an aspect. But with DDP, he was all new. It was all new stuff for him to root for, or to root for him. And then the other one I want to talk about before we wrap it up tonight is the man called Sting.
I'm going to say, for the most part, he helped. I think, I mean, he was their icon, right? He was their guy. Like, if you think about, like, other than Ric Flair, like, when you think of WCW, I think of Sting.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Sting and Ric Flair, the two biggest, like, WCW guys that there were. Because yes, Hogan was a big name, but he wasn't a WCW guy. You know, he was there on top for a good portion of their, like, big years, but I don't think anybody considered him a WCW guy. He was made somewhere else, right? Whereas Flair and Sting, they
Yeah.
were homegrown guys.
I compare it like that in the scenario to kind of like AJ Styles in Impact, right?
Yes.
He was a homegrown guy. He was Impact, and even when you brought somebody in from like Joe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Samoa Joe. I mean, whenever I think of Joe, I think of ROH more than I do Impact, and it's in the same vein. Like with what do you think of like what we just talked about? my brain just turned off. Luger or Hogan or anybody like that. It doesn't have that same feeling. But yeah, I think Sting helped tremendously in all aspects. Because he was a mix of a lot of things, right? Like he was that homegrown AJ Styles level character, but he was also their taker too when he needed to be the taker. When he became like the Crow Sting and stuff like that, like he did everything he needed to do and more for WCW. He was the man, like I would say, like he was the man who put WCW on his shoulders and ran with it, where the others were trying to taking care of themselves, like Nash and Hogan and everybody else. Sting took care of WCW.
Yeah, and I would even say he was the most loyal guy for WCW because he never left, never went to the WWF, whereas Flair did, right?
No.
So like Sting for years, even after WCW ended, he didn't go to WWF until much later. Maybe too late.
Yeah, decade and a half later.
Yeah. So the only, just to be devil's advocate for Sting a little bit though, was he perfect? Did he not make mistakes? I think he'd made a couple. Like I feel like when he did the Crow Sting, yes, he should have been in better shape when he came back. When he did the Hogan match, like he looked like he was out of shape and he was, like you had a year off. You'd think that you do nothing but get your body in shape, during that time, waiting for the moment, being ready. And I think if anything, him not being prepared for that moment, I mean, why give Hogan a reason to say it's not your time? You're this isn't going to work. I would have been so in shape, like when AJ Styles took time off and then he came back and he's jacked, or Randy Orton, he came back, in better shape than I've seen him in years. And so if he had done that, like Hogan wouldn't have had no choice. He'd be like, okay, this is going to work. This is the guy. But the fact that he didn't and he wasn't prepared, like even the mystique wore off fast once he went to the ring like a normal guy, and it was just out of shape Sting. It was like, okay, the aura is gone. So that's like the one big moment he wasn't ready for, the big moment. But I mean, that's nitpicking, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think for the most part, like there's so much he helped with the company. There's still to this day so many great Sting fans due to his time in WCW and everything else like that. And like you said, it's hard to not think of him when you think of WCW. So that's only beneficial.
Yeah, and if you want more of this discussion of like who killed WCW or whatnot, one of the main reasons we decided to do this episode tonight is Vice is doing a special docu-series. I'm not sure when it airs, but I know that it's going to be airing in the very near future of who killed WCW.
After this weekend's pay-per-view for WWE.
Okay.
I think it's in the ring.
Okay, so but it's a multi-episode series where they're going to interview a lot of these guys. And so yeah, I'm interested to see, them dive a little bit more into it and see, everybody's takes of it's going to be more on the side of, who killed WCW. That's the title of the episode after all, instead of who helped WCW. But I'm excited. I'm definitely going to be watching.
Same. I will totally be going to see it or going to be watching it when it airs. So, all right, Psycho. I think we're about there. So, guys, if you have any thoughts or anybody from the world of WCW who you think we should have talked about for the helps or hurts, please reach out to us on our social media. That's going to be Be Hero Media on Facebook, Instagram, and on TikTok. Nope, I like Twitter. And then you can reach out to me directly at Mike Burke DCW on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and Mike Burke Pro on Twitter. And you can reach out to Psycho at Psycho Wrestling on the Face of Books. All right. And speaking of wrestling, we are going to now talk about some of the upcoming Devotion Championship Wrestling shows. Our next show is going to be at Ace's Saloon in Salt Lake City for Bar Fights, May 31st. Following that, we will be in Salt Lake again and June 8th at not Light Tree Studios, at Valley Fair Mall. We will be that show for End of Term. I'm super excited for that show. It's going to be a great time. We will also be having a special for any workers out there listening. We will be having Gabe Sapolsky. He will be there doing WWE tryouts. So if you want to come down, reach out to us on social media for that, which I'll give you in just a moment. And then following that, we will be at the Taco Margarita Festival in Grand Junction, Colorado, June 15th. And then for Tussle Time 13 at Kamikaze's June 22nd. I'm excited. It's going to be a great time. We have a whole lot of shows coming up this next month. So reach out to us on social media at Devotion Championship Wrestling on Facebook, Instagram, DCW Salt Lake City on Twitter, and Devotion Wrestling on TikTok. All right, Psycho. Anything I'm forgetting?
I don't think so.
All righty. Well, guys, until next time, he has been Psycho. I have been me, and this is us tapping out. Have a good night, guys.